We are a small group, so you are going to have to do a lot better than that. I'm going to say it again. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm feeling especially grateful to be here today because I flew in from Cape Town and I was meant to fly in this morning. And there was a massive delay because the aeroplane needed fixing. So that in itself makes you nervous. And then we get onto that same airplane, and as the plane lands, it battles to stop. And then it makes some very strange noises as it did come to a stop. So my gratitude level is very high today. I'm feeling very happy to be here. I think we're talking all things babies and parenthood and family today. And for me, I think I don't need to share with this group the many hats that we wear as parents. I myself am also a parent. I think we wear a number of hats, and we know that there are different roles that we need to play in order for our children to succeed. And so some of those are obviously protecting our children. It is empowering them and ensuring that their well-being, their emotional well-being is ensured. It's their spiritual growth. It is social and cognitive development, as I'm sure you've spoken about, and the other speakers have shared a lot with you this morning. My area is focusing on the financial well-being. And I like to think that it's as important as everything else, if not a little bit more important, because it is the key enabler that drives everything else and ensures that we're able to play these many roles to our children. But if I ask parents, what is it that how would you summarize your role or condense this massive mandate that we have as parents and all of these different roles? And the number one thing that parents say is, I want to ensure that I set my child up for success in the future. I raise an adult that's able to go out into the world and be successful, by whatever definition of successful you choose to have or they choose to have in the future. But what's the one thing that parents say, including myself if you asked me a few years ago, what's the one thing we all say when we're asked, what is it that we want to do to raise successful children? Or what's the one thing we think will give them success in the future? We're a small enough group, so I'm going to ask for a shout out. Education, yes. Absolutely. So that's the thing that everybody says. It's, if I give my child a great education, then they will succeed in the world. And I think that's absolutely valid. I think what concerns me a little bit is that we tend to have a blind spot when we jump to education as the first and most important thing. And I'll talk to you now about why. So in this area of enabling success for our children and setting them up for success in the future, I'm going to break this down into 3 chapters. So I've said, chapter 1, the goose, the genie, the sandwich, and the pot of gold. And we'll unpack what that means in the next few minutes. So we've said that education is usually the answer that we all give. And I've said that I see this to be a little bit of a blind spot. And the reason I say that is there's a little thing that happens between now and that period in the future when we think of education and we think of the qualifications or the schooling or the type of experience that we want our children to have on the education front. And that blind spot is the period in between. And what happens in this period in between is that we've got to play a number of roles and we've got to do a number of things to make sure that every single day our children get all of the different aspects we spoke about, the cognitive development, the clothing, and all the other things, you know, the nappies, the wipes, the baby proofing. There are these obvious, immediate, and direct expenses, but there are also a number of expenses that become less obvious, but more imposing as time goes on. And some of those are things like making sure you have a baby-proof vehicle, making sure you have a home that's family-friendly. So how do you go about buying a bigger home, a home that has a garden, a home that's closer to schools? And those are bigger expenses. They're not as obvious to us as parents at the beginning. But whether your expenses are the short-term, immediate, obvious expenses or the longer-term expenses that are more impactful, the one thing most of them have in common is that for most of us here today, all of these expenses are supported by income. Okay, so our ability to earn an income is what funds all of these expenses. And income is a tricky concept. So it has three separate components, and the first part is where does it come from, who does it go to, and what is it for? So you've got the source, and for most of us that's an employer, or sometimes you're self-employed. Then you have the recipient, the person who actually receives the income, the mom or the dad. And it's a funny system of an arrear payment. So you put in work and you give output, and then you receive this income in exchange for it. And that's the piece that helps us to fund this road in between, the blind spot that I spoke of earlier. So if we have income funding all of it, and income is this tricky arrear payment sort of system, what we're then doing is saying for every single month that we're funding our children's lifestyle, that we are the lifeline to our families, we are hoping that nothing happens with any one of these components. So anything that happens to the source, to the employer, if there's a restructure, organizational restructure, if there are retrenchments, if there's liquidation, if there are branch movements, that could impact your income. If something happens to the mom or dad, God forbid, if you are no longer here or your ability to work is impacted, then of course your income is compromised. And of course, if the ability to generate an output, so if you've had cognitive issues, or even if you have a short-term period of time where you can't be at work, your income is then impacted, and it sacrifices that ability to provide this lifeline. So that lifeline is temporarily or long-term experiencing the interruption. So what do we do with this blind spot? Well, the first step and the first thing I want to say is that when we understand that our core duty is to set our children up for success, education has its place, but the first thing we're obliged to do is to protect the lifeline, to protect the lifeblood of their income, their lifestyles, and all of the things that will be funded out of it. And I'd like to just show you by way of an example what that promise of an income actually means to most of us. So this is dependent on your own individual income and your age, but I thought I'd take an example. So look at a parent that's 30 years old. If they plan to retire at age 65, and assume that you're earning 50,000 Rand a month at the moment, I've assumed that there are no promotions, that you simply earn inflation increases on an annual basis, so increases at 7%. How much would you earn over this period? So how much would that income be worth to you? Again, I'll ask for a shout out. I need one brave person. Okay, maybe 2 or 3. Sure, not one brave parent in this audience. 1 million? 5? 10? 30? 20 million? 20 and 30. Okay. Big differences there, but very, very close. 82 million. Okay?
Wow.
Just a few million off. So that is what this promise is worth to us in that example. That's the kind of promise of money, the promise of this arrear exchange that we're receiving. That's the kind of promise we're making to our children. And if we don't secure that promise, I would challenge why we go off and insure our cars that are worth 200,000 or 300,000 or 100,000, whatever that is, when our ability to earn an income potentially worth tens of millions of rands, and we're not doing the same. Okay, so that's the first thing. So where does the goose come in? Well, you are the goose, because you're the goose that lays the golden egg. And the first thing you do when you have a goose that lays a golden egg is you protect the goose. You make sure the goose is well taken care of. That's the first thing you do. And this idea of protecting, the idea of ensuring, is not an idea that landed or comes from the financial services industry. If you think about it, when we were growing up, I mean, we've all played the game where you say, what would you do if you had 3 wishes? And there's always that one friend, and sometimes you are the one friend, who says, I'll wish for 1,000 more wishes, or I'll wish for unlimited wishes. And what we're essentially doing at a very young age is saying, there is uncertainty about what I will be able to get in the future. Therefore, I will protect myself now by making sure I have enough wishes for the future. So the concept is inherent. We just don't apply it when we become adults. Okay, so something to think about. But what about the sandwich? Where does the sandwich fit in? Well, if we talked about the value of your income, it suddenly is important to see that our homes are not necessarily our biggest assets, as most of us think. Our properties are our biggest assets. We also tend to think that perhaps our pension funds are our biggest assets, which is not true. It's actually this pot of gold, and again, I'm calling you a goose and a pot of gold. This little one is very attracted to the pot of gold, is he? Okay. So it's not our tangible assets, but our ability to earn an income. Something. Here we go. If I can get the presentation up as well, please. Thank you. So it's our ability to earn an income, right? And that's our most important asset. But what we're faced with right now is, many of you in the room may experience it, what we're faced with is a number of generations over the recent decades that have gotten to retirement, are forced then to dip into their children to help support them in their retirement. So some of us are helping our parents, and some of us perhaps are not helping our parents, but know that a day will come when we have to help them in the future, or we may be forced to help them in the future. And so that's where the sandwich comes in, because we said, firstly, protect the lifeline, protect the income. But the second thing is, if you are not protecting your retirement, you will be subjecting your children to being sandwiched. You will be pushing them in the middle at some point in time when they should be enjoying their success and enjoying their own families. You will be dipping into that success and asking them to fund you. Okay. So chapter 1 is all about take care of yourself first. It's the biggest thing you can do to take care of your children. Secure your income firstly, secure your retirement. Then we move into chapter 2, and that's where I start saying education now comes in. Now you've taken care of the parent, what do you do to secure your child's education? I think we must have a very different conversation than we have in the past. So in the past it was, and maybe even now, we say, how much is an education policy? How do I go about starting to invest? Just going to get to the right spot, there we go. How do I go about starting to invest in education for my child? What's the minimum premium? How much should I invest, etc.? That is a great place or a great piece of conversation, but it must be preceded by another step. First, ask yourself, what type of future do I want to enable for my child? And there's a really good reason I say that. I really like a quote from Wayne Gretzky, who's known as the Great One in hockey. And someone asked him once in an interview, what is the secret to your success? And he said, the secret to my success is I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. So I want you to think about this and think about, where do you think the puck of the future will be in terms of education? So in the past, a tertiary education in any form was enough to differentiate our children in the workplace. That is no longer the case today. So what is it that will differentiate them? Is it a higher level of tertiary education? Do we say no longer a bachelor's degree, perhaps an honors degree, perhaps a master's or a PhD? Interestingly enough, what we're seeing in the last few years is that many professionals are actually jumping over. So they're qualifying in different fields and pulling that knowledge together. Is that where you think the puck of the future is going to go? Maybe education in its hardest form is not where the puck will be. Maybe intercultural understanding, globalization will play a bigger role. Maybe you'll need to couple qualifications with understanding different cultures and international travel, etc. So consider how that plays out, and then ask the question, how much do I need to save in an education plan? And there's a really great relationship here, because if you start early, which I think most of you have the luxury of doing if you have little kids, if you start really early, then your contribution can be small. So it's not important that you start big, but it is important that you start now. If you assume an 18-year timeline, and that was your contribution, just by leaving it 9 years and starting halfway in the future, your contribution would have to quadruple. You would have to 4 times over increase your contribution in order to land at the same place. So not important that you start big, it is important that you start now. And the final thing I would like to say is, chapter 3 for me, this is where I start to sound a bit crazy, but this is about true intergenerational wealth transfer. When my daughter was very young, I took out a retirement annuity for her, which means her retirement planning started at a few years old. And that sounds a little ridiculous. But what that does is truly sets her up for success in the future, because I didn't start big, but I started extremely early. And I'll show you by way of a quick example what this looks like. Imagine that you listened to this today and you understood the value of planning for retirement as early as possible. You shared this with your child, and as soon as they started work, I've just assumed they finish school, they do a 4-year degree, and then they start work. Assuming they start work and they retire at the earliest possible time legislatively today, they retire at 55, they would have contributed, in this example, 400,000 Rand in total, with premiums increasing over time. And the fact that they've been in that fund for as long as they have, they've benefited from that growth and would have received 1.3 million Rand. Okay, compound interest over time. What's really great, though, is if we rewind or we come back to the present, and instead of just telling your child about this, you chose to take a different route. You listened to the crazy things I said, and you said, okay, well, let me start contributing a little bit as well. And you contributed a little bit every month, so a very small amount. I think that works out to about 100 and some odd, less than 200 Rand a month. And you said, I don't actually want to increase it with inflation, I just want to know exactly what I'm paying. And you do it only for 18 years. So at the end of 18 years, there's just under 40,000 Rand sitting in that investment. Your child then understands Nikki shouting it out to me. 4.4 million. Thank you, Nikki. She has my slides. So 4.4 million, from 1.3 million to 4.4, okay? That's not math, that's magic. So you've put in under 40,000 Rand, less than 200 Rand a month, away for your child, and you would have boosted their retirement funding triple-fold. That's true intergenerational wealth transfer. And I want to end off today with a final thought. Old Mutual has just launched its rewards program. It is the first and only rewards program in the country that rewards you for good financial behavior. So as you do all the right things in terms of your financial planning, you earn points that you can spend at different partners. What's awesome about this is if you are an Old Mutual customer, you will get points, okay, as you go forward. If you are not an Old Mutual customer, you will get points. For what? For doing financial education, literacy, doing quizzes, understanding about your money and your finances. So please engage with the stand, and I hope that that was valuable despite all the challenges. Thank you very much.